Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I'm a psychotherapist, teacher, consultant, and most importantly, a wounded healer, living and working in Skokie, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. This is a space for thought-provoking, unscripted conversations with people from all walks of life, united by the shared mission of healing ourselves while promoting healing in the world around us. Whether you're here to find inspiration, learn, or simply feel seen, you're invited on this journey of healing from the individual to the collective. Thanks for joining me. Hello, everybody. It's just me. There's no Anne. It makes me sad to say that. But as you probably heard in last week's episode, things change and we evolve and we grow and we move on and we say goodbye and we got to be with the changes sometimes. So I realize that this might be a lot to spring on you right now, but we're also making some other changes to the podcast. So if you opened your Spotify or your Apple Podcast or wherever it is that you listen to your podcast and you're like, wait a minute, this episode's only around 30 minutes or so. There's a reason for that. So there's a method to our madness. I will explain it to you right now, so hopefully you can get a sense of what we're doing here. So the podcast is now going to air weekly with some strategic breaks. We're adopting sort of a semester type schedule, and we'll have a short summer break as well as Thanksgiving off and the last 2 weeks of December. And what we decided to do is split guest interviews into 2 half-hour-ish episodes. So as is today's episode with our esteemed guest, Ted Rau, you'll be introduced to the guest in a 30-ish minute episode. And then the following week, you'll get the conclusion of that episode. So things will air mostly in succession, of course, with these strategic breaks. And there's going to be a new special group practice focused podcast dropping in between each guest. And I'm going to fully announce that near the end of March once that has fully taken shape. So we're going to try out this schedule for 2025 and see how it feels for you and for me. And I really do actually hope that you'll share your feedback with me. And I know, as I said before, we're doing a little switcheroo with, Anne leaving and now with the format of the show. But I really hope that this change in schedule is ultimately going to be best for everyone. So I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of, the changes that have been happening for me and why some of the episodes that you're hearing have been sounding kind of different. And I've brought this up on several episodes, but just wanted to say it in an introduction so that people really understand. And I explained this quite at length with Ted at some point in our interview today, or maybe you'll hear it next week actually. But I am in a place in my career where individual work isn't quite as appealing to me. Not because I don't care, but because I'm really seeing systems stuff happening. I'm really feeling into our collective need to evolve together, especially as a field. And I think that I've got some stuff that can be helpful in that vein. So the episodes that you're going to hear, we're still going to have a lot of guests that are going to be the tried and true old school Conversations with a Wounded Healer episodes where we're just talking about, this individual person's healing journey and, how they've impacted their clients. We're definitely going to continue to do that. But there are going to be times where I have guests on where that person doesn't even identify as a therapist or a healer or anywhere even close to what you would think of as a healer, because I think that they have something that can help offer the collective. It's, a chance to grow and change and evolve. So that's what we're doing here. And I'll try to let you know sort of at the beginning of the episode so that you can decide, am I in a collective mood today or am I really in an individual healing mood today? I'll try to clue you into that as we move forward. So again, give me your feedback. I want it. I love it. I love you guys. In just 2 weeks, I think, we're going to have our 7-year anniversary of the podcast. There's not a lot of things that I've done 7 years in a row. I've been married. Oh my God. I can't remember how long I've been married now. 17, 16 or 17 years. That's like the only other thing I've done that long. And that's hard enough, right? Anybody who's married knows that. But yeah, I've been doing this podcast for a long time. And I know when I need something different, I'm imagining also the listeners need something different too. So for our 7-year anniversary, we're going to have a major fucking giveaway, you guys. I'm so excited about all the potential prizes that you can win if you participate in our giveaway. So anyway, I'll get to that later. Let's talk about my episode with Ted. So you're going to hear Ted and I talk about a concept called sociocracy. And Ted's going to explain that really beautifully, but it's essentially a model of governance. And to kind of put this in the frame for you of how I'm thinking about systems, I'm really trying to figure out how we bridge the gap specifically in the group practice world between where we are now with employees feeling underpaid and underappreciated and practice owners feeling overworked and underappreciated. How do we go from where we are now to a place that actually feels more equitable for everybody? And I have a hunch that sociocracy might be one of the ways that we can get there. So that's all I'm going to say about today's episode, and I'm going to let Ted tell you more. So Ted Rau is an advocate, trainer, and consultant for self-governance with a focus on sociocracy. After earning a PhD in linguistics and working in academia, he co-founded Sociocracy For All in 2016, a new global organization with 250 members. Ted consults with mission-driven organizations, teaches, and actively participates in Sociocracy For All's work. A transgender man and father of 5, Ted has lived in Massachusetts since 2010. He's the co-author of 3 books on self-governance, including Many Voices, One Song and Collective Power. He's currently writing on governance and wisdom. So please enjoy part 1 of my conversation with Ted Rau. Well, hello, Ted Rau. Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. And first question first, I need to understand your accent. As I was listening before, I was like, this is such an interesting accent. Where are you from? Tell me more.
I know it's a little bit of a mystery to people. So I grew up in Germany.
That
I
is.
grew up with a German mom in Germany, but with a British dad.
Aha.
And then I've lived in the US for 12 years. And even in Germany, people ask me where I'm from. So nobody knows.
Yeah. I love it. Well, great. So we have gotten in connection. I like to kind of like let the audience know where I know you from. So the audience knows all about Right Use of Power now because I'm a super fan. And I heard about you from Farzine, who is on the board, and he introduced sort of a little bit of the concepts at a training that I was at. And then we just did a training with the whole Rupee team and you were saying so many things that I was like, I have more questions and I have things that we need to talk about that are so related to my field. And so that's why I invited you here today.
And now I'm here.
And now you're here. So how did you get here? Wherever here is. You may start wherever it feels appropriate.
Got it. So I started a life in Germany, and then I didn't quite know what to do after high school, so I kind of did a default thing, which was to study German literature, which I enjoyed. But then I had to take a linguistics class for that, and I was instantly hooked and in love with linguistics. So that's what I did for the next 10 years. So I did my PhD in Germany and then came to the US for a postdoc thing, and then dropped out. Not because of anything with that, more because of the level of mobility that was not feasible with having, at the time, 4 young kids at home. So it was a little bit of a crossroads, like, do I go back to Germany and look for like jobs in academia, or do we stay in the US and do who knows what? Around that time, we also were thinking like, okay, well, if we stayed in the US, would it maybe be interesting to look at this other dream that we had, and that was to move into an intentional community. So we looked up intentional communities in our areas where we were living in Massachusetts, and there were 3 of them. It's like, okay, let's have a look. And one of them, again, we just instantly fell in love with. And it was actually a really sweet story because my daughter, my oldest, who was maybe 9 at the time, we pulled out of the parking lot and she said, okay, when are we moving in? So it was just a done deal for all of us. But that meant, it was really nice because she's just said it out loud, what we all were thinking. And then interestingly, this community that we then ended up moving into around that time was adopting sociocracy as its governance method.
Mm.
So all of a sudden, I was thrown into being a practitioner and thinking, in the beginning, I didn't really care. Like, it seemed like they had their act together. That's all we cared about for moving in. Little did I know that there's just so much variety around governance methods and how much it matters. I just had not paid attention to it.
Right.
And then I liked how it ran here. And it did feel a little unusual. It felt better. It felt refreshing. It felt somehow you didn't have to work against your grain so much.
Mm.
So then I started reading up on it. Then I got involved with the person who had brought it here, and so on and so on. And then I ended up co-founding with him, Jerry, one of my partners, and we lived together. And we co-founded Sociocracy For All. And that is a nonprofit that makes it more accessible. Because, there are people like me who would like to know about these things, but just didn't. And it felt to me back then when I got introduced to sociocracy, it felt a little bit like, it reminded me slightly of being introduced to of finding a cure for some disease that almost everybody suffers from.
Right.
Like, let's find the cure for this or that. You'd be going wait, other people should know about this.
Yes.
And it was really from that we called it Sociocracy For All, not as a you have to use it, but as you should know this exists. You are suffering from something you do not need to suffering from. And that's what we've been doing. We kind of put sociocracy on the map in a bunch of sectors. And that's what I've been spending the last 10 years doing.
Yes. Yeah. The way that you're describing it is exactly what I am thinking. Because I was just listening this morning to, are you familiar with integral and spiral dynamics and that whole world? Yeah. So I was listening to something on the Integral website today where they were talking about democracy and politics and how we're at the precipice of change needs to happen. What we have right now, especially from a democratic, of course, it's sort of like a mid-stage evolutionary model of governance, right? And when I first heard about sociocracy, I was like, oh yeah, that is the future. That may be where we need to go in so many different ways. So I'm curious, I know it's in the not-profit sector. Who is rolling sociocracy out? Who is trying this right now? What are you finding? What's going on out there?
Yeah. I will preface it by saying that the cool thing about sociocracy is that you can do it now, right? And at the same time, it is the future. You can just, any organization can do it now.
Yep.
And there are some footnotes to this. So intentional communities were the early adopters as a sector. In intentional communities, I now have people come to us and they say, we don't know much about any of this, but we asked 3 people and they all told us to use sociocracy. So that's kind of the status of it's flipped from crazy early adopters like the community I happened to live in to now it's basically the way to go.
Yeah.
Why would you do something else? So it's really flipped completely.
That's amazing.
Within a decade. So similar sectors that are kind of on the way, but clearly not as advanced on the journey are nonprofits, like the worker-run nonprofit sector, and co-ops, so worker co-ops in particular. And then recently somebody told me that she wanted to start a democratic school, and 2 people told her, oh no, you don't want to do it democratically, you want to have a sociocratic school.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, that's a new story for that sector, So that one is also, there's at least in that small niche of alternative schools, something seems to happen. Anyway, so that gives you a little bit of a sense, but there are also straight up businesses, in particular in Europe. I want to say in the US, that's a little harder. But in Europe, it is not unusual at all for businesses, even very established businesses, to look at sociocracy. Now, there's one little thing, and that is, I think, holding us back. And that points a little bit to why is it also the future at the same time. And that is that the current systems of how ownership is organized, the legal system, are really a little bit of a constraint on sociocracy. So the legal system assumes that there's a board or somebody that you can sue.
Right.
And decentralized responsibility is not that people who are really into legal stuff, they get a little big eyes. But all of that can be managed, but their first reaction is, wait, but then who's the ED?
Right.
And the other one is the ownership. So it thrives best where there's not one person who owns the whole thing, because why would you share power if in the end the bank recognizes exactly one person's signature?
Right.
That's just problematic.
Well, let's back up a little bit and help break down what sociocracy is so people can really understand this. We've thrown out the word democracy, models of governance, but really, what is it?
Yes. So any governance method, and I know we all don't walk around thinking about governance methods. So basically what you need to answer in any organization is who decides what? Because we can't decide everything, all of us, probably. That would be insane. So who decides what? Then the other piece is how do we decide? So once you've identified a certain group, you guys make the decisions on that. How will they decide? Do they vote? Do they talk until they all agree? Like what's that? And another piece that is a little bit of a bonus piece that people typically don't consider is how do we decide and who decides who decides.
Yeah.
So there's the who decides who decides piece.
Yeah.
Because, for example, if you can have semi-distributed decision making where somebody decides, you decide that, and you decide that, and you decide that. And now there are three places. But if we can change it, right, if we have to go back to our founder to change this, then it's still not really a living organization.
Right.
Anyway, so the answer of sociocracy is, okay, we make decisions, like kind of the fundamental decisions in teams that we call circles. And every circle has a decision-making authority, which we call domain. So a circle has a domain and happily does all the things that need to be done and makes all the decisions. For example, you might have a website circle that makes all the decisions about website and carries it out. And then you might have a circle for social media and they make all the decision on social media, what they post, how they post, who posts what, and then they do it. And how those circles get that authority is basically through an inheriting system. It kind of gets passed down, and that way we can always renegotiate it. The second piece is how do we decide? And that's by consent. So instead of talking till everybody agrees or voting, where then half of us might be against it and we still move forward, we use consent decision making, which means a decision passes if nobody in that group that makes the decision together has an objection, which means if you and I are a circle and I have a great idea and I propose it and I don't convince you, all I need is to make sure that you don't say no. So if you see any reason of why I'm screwing something up, if I do this thing, I would want to hear it, first of all.
Yep.
Then I would integrate it and we would come to some sort of a proposal that doesn't screw things up, and then we can just do it because there's no objection.
And in right use of power, we're saying safe to try, which I really, really like that idea. And I've been using that with some of my therapy clients too, in their intimate relationships where they're having struggles. And like, what if we, instead of trying to have consensus, try safe to try? And that's been going over really well. So yeah.
No, I see that. And the sociocracy version is super similar. And that's good enough for now and safe enough to try, which is that's good enough. Like, and there's one thing in that, and I'm sure that's implicit there too, is the for now piece, because there's at the same time a commitment to revisit and improve. We're going for, let's get something out in the world, some show on the road, and then we can improve it over time. So over time, we do want to get to awesome. But for right now, all we look for is something that is good enough to do something and then learn from it. And that's a really interesting piece about the commitment to feedback, to trying things out, to incremental improvement, which for me just means that we are not just sitting around hypothesizing about things, but we actually let kind of reality have the last word of let's try it and see what happens.
Right.
And that then puts us all into this cool position. And I'm imagining, I mean, that's kind of also the place where for families or couples that's useful, right, as an approach, because all of a sudden, none of us knows better.
Exactly.
Now we're just all learners, people try out, fumbling together. and that's a great place to be. It's so liberating, actually.
Yeah. Okay. This is where I have a lot of questions. So let me just give you a frame of what I see happening in my industry, and then I can kind of like, pull some of the threads here. So therapy in and of itself is a very heart-centered business, right? We want to help people. Obviously, in order to legitimize the therapy process, it had to be medicalized, which I think is way more constraining. The academic programs are very linear thinking sort of stuff. And so there's, from an integral or spiral dynamics perspective, we would say like there's this orange and green sort of, power struggle, right? From running small businesses, because like you said earlier, the way that the legal system is run, the financial systems are run, and because I think therapists don't know any better, we just do what we see. Everybody's running hierarchical businesses that are, straight up business structure. And a lot of the therapists don't want that. They feel like it should be more consensus based and we should all have a say and be able to make decisions. And my hope in bringing in sociocracy to this group is that we can not only empower people to learn more about how these businesses work, right? Because I think in our training, you said something about there are some places where, organizations will let everyone just decide what they get paid. And the former practice owner in me just went, because this is one of the exact things that's happening in Chicago specifically right now is it's generally the owner owns the business and then therapists work on commission. And so it's usually about a 50-50 split. And everybody wants to make more money, but nobody understands how the business is run. And so I'm imagining if we begin to find owners who are ready to give up the power and the profit that comes with that position, we would then need employees to be able to rise to the occasion and learn part of the business, because they would have to learn that you can't just make 80% of your commission, because then where are we going to get the money for the electronic medical record system or the rent or right, all this other stuff. But from where I sit right now, I cannot fathom how we get from here to there. So solve it all for me right now, Ted.
Okay, let's see. So there's a lot here. Let me just kind of just gonna think
Please,
out loud to see what's there. So several stray thoughts. One is I completely hear you on the so why do people use hierarchical decision making? Typically, well, first of all, we all know it, right? We all know how it works. So it's the simplest form to make sure that things move forward. I just make myself the boss and you just do what you're supposed to do. Now, there is, of course, a downside with that, right? And the downside is that now I might make a decision that makes zero sense in the person's context all of a sudden.
Right.
Because I don't actually know what the billing system is, and I'm telling you to do something that simply doesn't apply. So that's that gap that we see in hierarchical organizations, right? That the people lower, closer to the work, lower in the hierarchy, do stuff, and the decisions that come from further up just simply don't make any sense, and everybody looks at each other a little embarrassed. So now that's a piece. Now the interesting thing is that now then sometimes people swing over to the other extreme, right? And they say, oh, we should all decide everybody and talk till everybody is happy and hear everybody's input. That's just the other extreme. That's a super green, right? In that terminology of behavior that also isn't helpful, because now we set our expectation the other way. And the sad thing is that truth is somewhere in between.
Right.
Because participatory decision making has its downsides, right? Everything takes longer and so on and so on, especially if we're trying to also make money. That's going to cut into our time. We're going to waste resources there.
Right.
So how do we have a system that is as participatory as possible while moving forward? And that's exactly what's the cool thing about sociocracy, is it gives us the pattern language to design that. Interestingly, though, while it gives us the pattern language, people still need to understand how to use it. Let's see, how can I make this beginner friendly?
Yeah.
Let's say we have now I'm thinking, can I make up a scenario from a therapy context? Let's say we want, how when you schedule, some people might be willing to go 15 minutes over time and some people are absolutely not.
That's a great example.
Because they have to pick up their kids.
Yep.
Right. Now, we could say, oh, we know each other really well. You know that on Wednesdays I have the kids and on Thursday I don't. So the scheduler, we don't need a rule for this. Just keep it all in mind and then make a good decision. That would be a very decentralized, low policy kind of way of going about it, which is great. And now that means that the person has to hold all that information in their heads. Mm-hmm. That means, mistakes will be made eventually because your kid's schedule changed and you didn't say it. And now all of a sudden somebody needs to be rescheduled and everybody's a little pissed. Now, the other version would be to make a hard and fast rule and decide together, no appointments are scheduled beyond that line in the calendar. Yep. And that's just how it works, and never overstep. And each of those approaches has a context in which it's the right approach. Or the better approach. I'm not even saying perfect, just like the better approach, more appropriate to the context.
Right.
So sociocracy neither tells you do this or that. You can make a policy decision, or you can choose not to make a policy decision, or to define, whatever it's in that person's role to just decide. The thing is, you still need to see what's the best version for you.
Mhm.
But different from basically all other systems, you now can calibrate. So it gives you a lot of choices to calibrate of how much power do we want to give to one person? How much power do we want to put in policies? How many spaces do we want to leave undefined and trust that we know each other well enough? All of that now becomes something that you can play with, which is great. And also for the beginner who has never thought about organizations and how they work, there's a little bit of a learning curve.
Right.
But you wanted it all fixed. So now I need to think a little bit harder. That was just kind of setting the stage. Now the interesting thing, now actually I have a good continuation point. So what one can do, for example, is let's say we have a business where the owner decides 100% of everything. That's just as a thought experiment. Now, what one could do is say, okay, the owner, instead of deciding 100% of everything, now decides 80% and 20% are decided by a circle. And the 20% are everything that has to do with scheduling, to stick with that example. That is now decided by a circle. Okay. And now we can practice that. And now we're going to do everything that has to do with website. And everybody needs to think a little about branding and whatever, usability and whatnot. And over time, I imagine it like over time, we can take some of the domain pieces that are pieces that need to be held by somebody responsibly and shift them over as people are ready. Because I see it all the time that people, they like scream for more power. I want to have a say, and as soon as they have it, they're like, oh shit, this comes with a responsibility. I didn't want that. So how much can people handle? And often, one last thing on that, I see the dynamic between founders and organizations, that the organizations are like, the founder never shares, and being a founder myself, I have a lot of compassion for founders.
Me too.
And owners. Like I didn't technically own it, but it's like, this is not as easy as you think.
Exactly. Yes.
It's like, no. It's just because you have a lot of passion. You do not understand what you're deciding here. So I'll sometimes use the image of a baton, like to pass on the baton, I need to let go. That is true. But you need to take it.
You have to take it.
And you need to take it. Exactly. Yes. And that's what we're trying to do. That hand of clear. We sit together, we define, this is your role. Is this your role as you understand it? Is that what you will and can do? And then the other person, can do. And then we see, does it fit?
Right.
Does my role fit into the circle into the rest? Yes. Okay. Then let's try that out for a while and see if it's good enough.
Yeah.
That's so in a nutshell.
And now that you're saying this, what I'm also, if I can widen this out to the clinical space too, because therapists, I think, especially since the pandemic, I mean, since for sure 2016, when Trump was elected, there's been more acuity in the therapy room, more people having more problems more urgently. And therapists have felt really drained, especially post-pandemic. I do not think we've recovered. And a trend that I'm seeing a lot now with my students and with my younger supervisees is the client coming in expecting the therapist to fix them. So when you're talking about passing the baton, that's what therapy is too. Like, I don't have everything that I give to you, but here, I'll give you all my clinical knowledge, but you have to pick it up and take it. And so this works both on the clinical level and on the business level. And this is the piece that I'm trying to help more employees understand the parts of business that they need to understand in order to pick up the stuff that they can pick up. Because you're right that the problem is that everybody's pointing at the owner and saying, you're taking all my money, and they have no idea what the owner is doing. And the owner is saying, I'm not taking your money. You're not doing this thing. Everybody's pointing fingers at everyone, and nobody knows how to get out of this. So I love that analogy of passing the baton, and I'm going to use that. That's brilliant. I love it.
And by the way, there's so much interference, or the kind of interplay also between kind of that, how do you hold your personal power? I mean, that's why the right use of power stuff is also so relevant, but also just the basic skills in therapy, right? So basically, sociocracy requires for individuals to have that sorted out to some extent.
Yes.
Because if you have somebody in a circle, it's like, oh, we can't do this, and this is impossible, and you're always mean to me kind of stuff.
Yes.
That's not going to work well, right? So we basically rely on people walking in the door, having done enough of it. We don't have to be perfect, but enough of their work that we can start thinking about the business. Let's think about the organization and let's
Yes.
put your drama aside for just a moment.
Yes.
And I think there's two things that happen here. One is kind of that, as I said it, with the requirement of like we can only spend so much time on people's personal drama while we're trying to do an organization. There's just only so much headspace.
Mm-hmm.
But the other piece is that in a really interesting way, sociocracy becomes a practice ground to try on and try out and practice, like practice as in
Yes.
achieve some stamina in holding yourself in this way
Yes.
in relationship to others.
Yes. Thanks to our guest for an amazing episode. Make sure to tune in next week for the conclusion of today's conversation. To find out more about our guests, you can visit www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast. You can find me at Head Heart Biz Therapy on Facebook and Instagram. And thanks as always to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, to Liam O'Donnell for the album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. And I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. Until next time.